Imagine being a young European in the 1920s, early 1930s. You live in a time of post-war, a time when the innovation of ideas, technology, and politics are just starting to take place. But while society is beginning to take off in a new direction, you still don't see yourself as an accepted member of society because you're queer. You most likely live in a country while it stands for the ideas of liberalism and acceptance. It is still a criminal act to engage in acts of homosexuality and transsexualism. You look over to America, which spouts this idea of being the best country in the world where anyone can make it, but all you see is racism, sexism, homophobia, and the fear of outsiders. So you live your life in the shadows until you hear of a city in a country ravaged by World War I, where a large part of the population is continuing to struggle with high unemployment and deprivations, but where there seems to be a sort of tolerance growing. You hear of the wild nightclubs where you can dance with whomever you want. You hear of the new research institute by Magnus Hirschfeld that specializes in sex research, specifically for non-straight cis people. And if you haven't heard of this yet, you should really check out my last video. So you turn to your friend and hop on the next train bound for Berlin, thinking, yes, this is the place where I can be me. And that is how so many queer people from all over the world ended up in Berlin during the Weimar Republic years, or the time between world wars. One of the young gay men who ventured into the wild world of Berlin during this time was English author Christopher Isherwood, who is said to have come to Berlin for the boys. In March of 1929, Isherwood visited fellow author and lifelong friend W.H. Auden, who was spending a post-grad year in the city. The visit, only 10 days, completely changed Isherwood's life, as he began to see the liberation of homosexuals. He began an affair with a young German boy he met at a bar and found his people. He visited Berlin one more time before he officially moved there that November. It is through Isherwood and his largely biographical portrayals of the city and the people he met there that we get this image of a free city, a city that did not care who you were or who you loved, as long as you were there to have a good time. So let's travel back in time and look at gay Berlin. I'm Alexis Arrington, and this is Everyone's Gay, a look into queer history. Berlin has a long history of gay culture. In the 1920s and early 1930s, it was seen as the gay capital of Europe. Long before Christopher Isherwood arrived in Berlin, the world's first gay magazine started there in 1896. It was called Der Engine, or The Self-Owning, or directly translated, The Unique. The title refers to the classic anarchist work by Max Stirner, and early issues reflected the philosophy of Stirner as well as other views on political anarchism. In the 1920s, the journal shifted to support the liberal democracy of the Weimar Republic as it interwove culture, art, and political material, as it included poetry, prose, political manifestos, and nude images. Meanwhile, in 1919, Magnus Hirschfeld opened his Institute of Sex Research, which I did a whole episode on last time, so make sure to check that out if you have not yet. The world's first official gay village emerged during this time as well, after the first gay demonstration occurred on Nollendorfplatz in Schöneberg, a neighborhood in Berlin. The neighborhood soon became filled with gay and lesbian bars and nightclubs. Queer art was expressed through films, music, and print publications. There were cabarets that featured famous singers and dancers. The city was so progressive that people thought that same-sex marriage was a large possibility. And had the Nazis come to power a few years later, or not at all, it would have happened. But yet, in this accepting city, homosexuality was still technically criminalized. So how did we get to this point? Well, first, we have to look at a long line of German history and literature, specifically back to Karl Heinrich Ulrichs, a German lawyer, journalist, and author who is today known as a pioneer of the gay rights movement. Jorix identified as a yearning, which was first defined and published by Jorix himself in a series of booklets under the title Research in the Riddle of Man-Male Love. The word yearning alludes to Plato's Symposium on a discussion of love, and is derived from the Greek goddess Aphrodite Urania. The word represents another gender, the homosexual gender, as Jorix explained. After publishing his work under a pseudonym, Jorix decided to come out publicly and began publishing under his own name. In 1867, he became the first homosexual to speak out publicly in defense of homosexuality, when he pleaded at the Congress of German Jurists for a resolution urging the repeal of the anti-homosexual laws. He was shouted down, and only a few years later, in 1871, paragraph 175 was passed. This new law made homosexual acts between males a crime, until 1994, when the law was officially struck down in all of Germany. 140,000 men were convicted under this law, with a spike during the Nazi regime. So you might be thinking, if this is the case, if 140,000 men were convicted under the law, how on earth was Berlin this liberal gay place? I mean, Berlin was the capital of Germany. How was it able to do this? Well, in 1929, the German Reichstag nearly decriminalized homosexuality, but the post-war political crash made a final vote impossible. And then, with the rise of fascism and the post-World War II split of the country, the law simply stayed in place. But Berlin didn't really listen. And while people were still arrested in Berlin, they held on to the German ideals of exceptionalism and romanticism, which led to Berlin becoming a safe haven. So this is the world that Christopher Isherwood enters into when he moves to Berlin in 1929. Originally from England, he was born to the son of a professional soldier killed in World War I. He attended a boarding school where he and a friend wrote stories to entertain each other, and would later attend Cambridge, until he was asked to leave without a degree in 1925. It was that year that he reconnected with an old childhood friend, W.H. Auden, and they began sending poems back and forth, enthusiastically but harshly critiquing each other's work. And Isherwood joined authors such as Upward, his childhood friend, Auden, and Spender as the most exciting new literary group in the 1930s. As I explained earlier, Isherwood followed Auden to Berlin in 1929, where he kept a diary, in which he gathered raw material that he used to write the Berlin Stories, which featured his books Mr. Norris Changes Trains and Goodbye to Berlin. Mr. Norris Changes Trains, published in 1935, follows the movements of William Bradshaw, who meets a nervous-looking man named Arthur Norris on a train. Throughout the novel, we find that Mr. Norris is a very strange and mysterious man that opens William to the underground world of Berlin, which includes crazy parties, communist meetings, and other events that were uncommon for the time. The novel was inspired by Isherwood's real-life friend, Gerald Hamilton, a British memoirist, critic, and internationalist known as the wickedest man in Europe. Goodbye to Berlin, published in 1939, portrays a city in which Adolf Hitler is rising to power. There is poverty, unemployment, and increasing attacks on Jews and communists. But for the people that live there, it's all forgotten when you enter the nightlife. In Goodbye to Berlin, there is a character named Sally Boyles, who becomes the center of the 1966 musical Cabaret. Sally Boyles herself was based on a young English woman named Jean Ross. Ross was politically active in the underground Communist Party, just like her literary counterpart, and also worked as a singer and dancer in one of Berlin's infamous cabaret nightclubs, presumably one for lesbians. Cabarets, famous during the time, became known for their color, freedom, and decadence, with performances often containing political ideas and undertones. Cabarets were frequently patronized by gay men, lesbians, and transgender people who saw the cabaret scene as a safe place to openly display and discuss sexuality. On the stages, girls showed off their legs, posed naked with audience members, or watched actors tell risque jokes. Direct accounts of those who attended cabarets claim the clubs were full of men wearing makeup and women in tuxedos, offering a scene that would turn the rest of the world upside down, but was completely normal in Berlin. The El Dorado, is the most famous nightclub that not only attracted homosexuals but also artists, authors, celebrities, and tourists wanting to admire a piece of Berlin. Other bars were full of gay men who were able to dance together, and while Berlin was a party capital and still is today, there was no evidence of drunkenness or lewd behavior, just men enjoying the company of each other and enjoying the freedoms of being themselves. Isherwood talks about this in his autobiography by specifically looking at the bar Causey Corner, which was in real life called Noster's Cottage, a pub established in 1909 in the working class district of Hallesches Tor. Side note, this is actually where I lived when I did my study abroad time in Germany, so I know the neighborhood very well. Inside, the bar was homey, Isherwood described, with the only real attraction being the boys dancing inside. Lesbians could be found at the typical gay male bar and club, but there was also a handful of exclusively lesbian bars in the city. There were over 50 of them in the city that were very diverse in terms of size, class, and offered entertainment. Dr. Magnus Hirschfeld recounted that these lesbian bars could get a little rowdy, and he knew one lesbian cabaret where a performer had been arrested when her act became, let's just say, a little too spicy. Before World War I, artists, prostitutes, professional women, and single working-class women had frequently lived in same-sex circles that permitted lesbian relationships. In the 1920s, mixing of these circles began to link women across culture, class, and the bars helped with this mingling, allowing for people from all parts of life to meet, dance, and form relationships. The bars, for both gay and lesbian, were packed on Saturdays and Sundays, and also held elaborate gay balls on regular occasions. Magnus Hirschfeld recounted one New Year's Eve ball that had more than 800 people accounted. Some people, he stated, were in suits or fancy dresses, but many were in costumes. A few appeared in masks that completely hid their faces. They came and went without anyone having any idea of who they were. Others left their cocoons approximately at midnight. Not a few men were dressed in women's clothing.
For the trans community of the time, Berlin was a little different. While it still offered the freedoms that the bars offered the homosexual community, it wasn't as free for the transvestites, a term used during the time and coined by Magnus Hirschfeld in 1910. This term described both cross-dressers and transgender people. Many wore clothes traditionally associated with the opposite sex, only on special occasions, such as the balls. Others lived fully as a gender different from their sex at birth. The majority seemed only interested in passing, while some wanted to change the normative order in Berlin and the rest of the world at the time. Many queer activists of the time saw the population of gender-variant people as too fragmented, as trans people were not visible or organized as their homosexual counterpart. But this did not stop the community, as Friedrich Reidenschutz attempted to foster a trans community with the production of The Third Sex, a magazine that contained scientific essays, fictional stories, advice columns, and autobiographical essays. One of these autobiographical essays featured was by Hans Hannah Berg, in which she described how a trusted girlfriend helped her realize her dream. The friend assisted with makeup and provided security as Hans Hannah made her first steps into Berlin. At the cinema, a gentleman presented an unexpected obstacle by offering the gracious Frau his seat, which stunned Hans Hannah into silence. Another man attempted to pick her up. Walking through the street with her supportive friend gave Hans Hannah the confidence to explore her sexual identity. This is the role that the third sex aimed to play by offering tips, boosting confidence, and ensuring readers that they could live their lives to the truest without hiding.
The Weimar Republic's Berlin offered a place to be free from the rest of the world's societal standards and norms that harshly criminalized gay and trans communities. People were able to dance, be themselves, fall in and out of love freely, and this is a world that Christopher Isherwood wrote about. Sadly, like most German history, this came to an end as Hitler rose to power. Adolf Hitler hated Berlin. He hated the architecture, the city layout, but especially the liberal people that inhabited the city. Both communists, homosexuals, transgender people, and others who were viewed as anarchists for the time. Homosexuals who frequented the bars and participated in queer life of Berlin became specific targets by the Nazi Party. Businesses became under attack by party members, along with those who frequented them. Those who could leave, such as Christopher Isherwood, did leave, but were then forced to live in secret again. During the course of World War II and the Holocaust, an estimated 100,000 men were arrested as homosexuals, with about half being officially sentenced. An estimated 5,000 to 15,000 of these men were incarcerated in Nazi concentration camps, where they were marked with the pink triangle. For a variety of reasons, lesbians were not widely persecuted in the Nazi period. However, there are a number of cases of lesbians imprisoned in concentration camps. Those who were sent to the camps were classified as asocials and wore a black triangle. Because paragraph 175 only covered male homosexuality, authorities sent lesbians under the title of asocial so they could send any woman whose lifestyle they disapproved of to the concentration camps. When the camps were liberated in the aftermath of the Third Reich, gay victims were not recognized. Their stories were not told, and they were not given help to cope with what they had been through. This was due in part to paragraph 175, which remained part of the German Penal Code, along with the views of the Soviet Union and the Allies who controlled the region. It wasn't until the 1980s that these forgotten victims were able to be discussed and tell their stories. In December 2003, the plans to erect a memorial in Berlin at the boundary of the Tiergarten were approved. There is also a memorial in Schönberg, the original gay village. While homosexuals continued to be criminalized, discriminated against, and persecuted by the Soviet Union and the Allies throughout the later part of the 20th century, Berlin retained its gay culture underground. And while it is no longer considered the gay capital of the world, it's still very, very gay and very accepting of all people. No matter who you are or who you love, you are always welcome in Berlin. Since the reunification of Germany, they've been making major steps to become a world leader in the equality of LGBTQ+ peoples. And in 2017, around 80 years after Isherwood believed marriage equality would be reached, Germany officially allowed marriage between same-sex couples. For more information on gay Berlin, check out Christopher Isherwood's Berlin Stories to get a polished version of what his life was like.
If you speak German and have an interest in the transgender community of the time, there is a collection of the Third Sex magazines available for purchase on Amazon.
In addition, check out the book Gay Berlin, Birthplace of Modern Identity by Robert Beachy. Beachy speaks on how Berlin became the undisputed gay capital of the world and talks in depth about Ulrichs and the Weimar Republic. Lastly, if you're tuning in for the first time and want to learn more about Magnus Hirschfeld and his Institute of Sex Research, check out the episode from last week that speaks directly on this topic. A link will pop up on the end screen in just a minute. This has been the 7th episode of Everyone's Gay, a look into queer history. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to leave a like below, hit subscribe, and share it with your friends. And make sure you find us on Facebook at facebook.com/everyone's gay queer history. I'm Lexis Harrington, and we'll see you next time.